Thank you, everybody. That was fun this morning. Would you join me for a word of prayer to begin today? Loving God, speak to us once again through these words of the Apostle Paul and these words of Jesus. And may the words of my mouth and the meditations of all of our hearts be acceptable in your sight. You are our rock and our Redeemer. Amen. A young and very successful stockbroker parked his brand new top-of-the-line red shiny Porsche convertible out in front of his office building, and as soon as he opened the door, a large construction truck blitzed by and ripped off the driver's side door as it went past. Well, the young man was devastated because that car had become his pride and joy, and he'd only had it a week, and so he was distraught, and the truck driver came back to ask him if he was okay, and he was so upset, he said, "You idiot, look what you did to my brand new car." And he was yelling and cussing at the guy. Well, a few minutes later, a police officer showed up on the scene, and the young man had not calmed down at all. He was still yelling and cursing at the driver of the truck. And all of a sudden, the police officer got a hold of him and said, "Would you please calm down, you idiot? You didn't realize that when the door got ripped off, so did the lower portion of your left arm." And the young man looked down at his bleeding left arm, and all of a sudden he looked up and he said, "Oh my gosh, what happened to my new Rolex?" Now, Fred Craddock, who is a famous preacher in North America, he's a disciples preacher, he tells the story about a church that was trying to adjust its mission to reach the secular culture. And so they decided to rewrite those famous words of the Apostle Paul, 1 Corinthians 13, but they replaced the word love with the word money. And so the New Translation said this: "If I speak in the tongues of mortals and of angels, but I do not have money, I am nothing. If I could prophesy and understand all secrets and all knowledge, but do not have money, I am nothing. If I didn't have money, I would be nothing more than a noisy gong or a clanging cymbal. Money is always faithful and kind, always hopeful and to be trusted. Money never ends. And now abide these three things: faith, hope, and money, but the greatest of these is money." Now, in his own humorous way, Fred Craddock has pointed to an undeniable truth in our culture. Money is worshiped, and it's often the case that it replaces love. This morning we're continuing the summer sermon series on the powerful words of the Apostle Paul, and we're going to focus on this passage from the pastoral epistles where Paul writes these words to Timothy, and this is one of the most often misquoted verses in all of Scripture. Paul tells Timothy, "The love of money is the root of all kinds of evil." Now notice he does not say money is the root of all kinds of evil, but the love of money is the root of all kinds of evil. Now, like I did last week, let me begin this morning with a few general statements about this topic. First of all, I think that the church does a huge disservice when it only talks about money when it's trying to raise money in a stewardship campaign or a capital campaign. So let me tell you this morning that we're not trying to raise money, but we're going to talk about money. Of course the church needs money. Anything you give to Woodmont will be put to good use for mission and for ministry. I hope that you know that. But money should not just be talked about when the church is trying to raise money. Secondly, how we use our money in life is an indication of our priorities and our spiritual life. Jesus made this clear in the Sermon on the Mount when he said, "Where your treasure is, there your heart will be also." And this is true not just for Christians, but also for non-Christians. If you want to know what is most important to a person, then you can take a look at their bank statement, their checking account, their credit card bill, and that will tell you what is most important to that person. Where your treasure is, there your heart will be also. Third, money is a reality for every single one of us. We have to deal with it. We have to think about it. We often stress over it. It takes money to live and to survive in this world. It takes money to pay your mortgage. It takes money to pay your bills. It takes money to raise kids. It takes money to send kids to college. Money is a universal reality, and it often causes a lot of stress and pain in our lives, right? Fourth, money is the number one source of conflict in marriages, and it often leads to major problems in families. This has to do with lifestyle expectations and standards of living. This has to do with honesty and transparency, or a lack thereof. Fifth, money is directly tied to power and influence. And those who have money are often able to control certain situations and circumstances, and sometimes this is a good thing, and sometimes this is not a good thing. It depends on motive and intentions. Sixth, begrudging or resenting somebody because they are rich accomplishes nothing. A much better approach is to challenge people who have means to give back and to make a difference. Jesus never says that being rich is wrong, but he does say that being rich and never giving back is a problem. To whom much has been given, much will be required. Being rich brings with it moral responsibility. And seventh, having money does not entitle anyone to act superior to or better than other people. Let me put this out there for your consideration. Regardless of your politics, whatever they might be, I would contend that there are at least two different types of entitled people in our culture. There are those who want to be taken care of and who are looking for a handout. And there are also those who have a lot and they feel like the rules don't apply to them. So when we say the word entitled people, it could refer to multiple groups. About 2 weeks ago, Megan and I were invited to attend a dinner downtown with Melinda Gates and Amy Grant. And it was a small event, about 60 people. It was a very inspiring event, but basically the Gates Foundation has partnered with Bill Frist's organization, Hope Through Healing Hands, which is something that Woodmont has been involved with for a number of years now. And they are placing an emphasis on maternal health in third world countries. Every year there are millions of mothers and babies who die because they lack basic knowledge about contraception and also about family planning and spacing out babies. And so Melinda Gates wants to use her wealth and her influence to take on that cause. And she wants to partner with religious leaders, not just in Nashville, but across the country, to try to get this message out there. And so that's how I ended up at the dinner. But it's so amazing to me to see one of the wealthiest, if not the wealthiest person in the world, so passionate about such an important cause. And she and her husband, Bill, are determined to make a difference, and they already are in many ways. Paul says to Timothy, the love of money is the root of all kinds of evil. The love of money is the root of all kinds of evil. I find William Barclay's commentary on this passage very helpful. He says, money in and of itself is neither good nor bad, but the love of it may lead to evil. With it, a person can selfishly serve their own desires, and with it, a person may answer the cry of their neighbor's needs. With it, a person may facilitate the path of wrongdoing. With it, they may make it easier for someone to live as God meant for the person to live. Money itself is not evil, but it is a great responsibility. It is powerful to good and powerful to evil. And then Barclay goes on to make some basic points about this verse. And I want to share those with you this morning, and I'm going to build on them just a little bit. First of all, he says that a desire for money tends to be a thirst that can never be quenched. Simply put, it can easily become an addiction or an obsession. When John Rockefeller Jr. was once asked, Mr. Rockefeller, how much is enough? Do you know what his answer was? Just a little bit more. In his 2009 book, Money, Greed, and God, that I would recommend to any Christian business person, Jay Richards defends capitalism from a Christian perspective, and he debunks 8 myths about wealth, poverty, and free enterprise. And one of the myths in that book is called the greed myth. Simply put, isn't greed the basis for capitalism? And Richards says no. He says this is where Ayn Rand got it wrong. He says that the basis of capitalistic system is not greed or consumption, but intuition, imagination, and creation. As Thomas Edison once famously said, I find out what the world needs, and then I proceed to invent it. Capitalism is not based on greed. However, capitalism can lend itself to greed if we fall victim to the love of money. If we get to the point where we are never satisfied in life, where we always want more, that is not healthy. I mean, there is absolutely nothing wrong with working hard and trying to achieve and move ahead, but every now and then you've got to turn it off and enjoy life a little bit. I don't want anybody to hear me saying this morning that you shouldn't work hard in life, that you shouldn't work hard to get promotions and to climb in your business. In fact, when I hear about Woodmont members that have received a new promotion or a new position, I think to myself, great, now I can challenge them to be generous with that. I think Paul says it best, though, in his letter to the Philippians when he writes, I've learned to be content with whatever I have. I know what it is to have little, and I know what it is to have plenty. As we make our way through life, we should all work hard, but it's important to be thankful for what we have along the way, because this is a sign of spiritual maturity. Gratitude is very, very important. The second point that Barclay makes is that the desire for wealth is founded on an illusion. It's founded on the desire for security, but wealth cannot buy security. It cannot buy health, nor real love, and it cannot save us from sorrow and from death. The security which is founded on material things is doomed to failure, he says. And if you doubt that, then I challenge you to think back to 2008 and 2009. Do you remember what happened? Do you remember how you felt? Do you remember what it was like to see savings accounts and retirement accounts cut in half? Nothing is guaranteed. Money can disappear in a heartbeat, and it often does. Now, we could argue this point with William Barclay, because we could certainly say that wealth and savings does give us some sense of security and peace of mind in life. I mean, after all, we don't want to get to retirement and not have anything in the bank, especially in an age where people are living longer and longer. We don't want our children to get to college and not be able to help them with their education, right? But it still remains true that the most important things in life cannot be bought with money. Health, love, family, friends, faith, and wealth does not save us from heartache and from pain and from death. I like the story that's told about the wealthy banker who pulled his wife aside and he said, honey, I've worked really hard to earn all this, and so I have a request for you. When I die, I want to take this with me. I want you to take all the money that I've earned and I want you to put it in the casket with me. Will you do that? She said, well, sure, whatever you want, sweetie. Well, a few months later, the guy died. And a friend of the couple came by the house and said, well, did you honor his request? Did you put everything that he had in the casket with him? And she said, I sure did. He said, well, how in the world did you do that? She said, I wrote him a check. Paul writes to Timothy, we brought nothing into this world and we will take nothing out of it. Stanley Hauerwas says that discipleship is extended training in being dispossessed. To become followers of Jesus, we must, like him, be dispossessed of all that we think gives us power over our own lives and the lives of other people. Don't let your possessions possess you. He also says that perhaps the most remarkable aspect of learning to live joyfully is that we learn to see the simple and most common aspects of our existence, such as our friends and our spouses and our children, as sheer gifts to which we have no right but who are nonetheless present to us. You see, when we only find joy and security in life through acquisition and accumulation, when we become defined by what we have rather than by who we are, we have a spiritual problem on our hands. And the sooner we can address it, the better. You know, when somebody tells me, that's so-and-so, and he's the president of blankety blank, and that is one wealthy guy right there. And I think, well, that's great. Tell me about him. Is he nice? Does he care about other people? Is he a good father? Is he a good husband? I mean, that's great that he's wealthy, but guess what? There's more to life than that. Third, Barclay says, the love of money can make a person selfish. I talked last week about family dynamics, and I said that the first characteristic of a healthy family dynamic is unselfishness. And really, if you think about it, the whole Christian life is a big experiment in learning to be unselfish. And some of us do better than others. Adam Hamilton is a United Methodist pastor, somebody that I respect. He wrote a book titled Enough. We actually used that a couple years ago in our stewardship campaign. But Enough, Discovering Joy Through Simplicity and Generosity. And in that book he says, inside of us there is a brokenness. The Bible calls it sin. Our souls were created in the image of God, but they have been distorted. We were meant to desire God, but we have turned that desire toward possessions. We were meant to find our security in God, but we find it in amassing wealth. We were meant to love people, but instead we compete with them. We were meant to enjoy the simple pleasures of life, but we busy ourselves with pursuing money and things. We were meant to be generous and to share with those in need, but we selfishly hoard our resources for ourselves. See, everybody has a different understanding of what selfishness looks like. And some people in our culture live as though the entire world revolves around them and their needs. It's been said before that there is no smaller package in life than somebody who is all wrapped up in themselves, and I think that that's true. But here's the deal. The way somebody spends their money and their time is an indication of whether or not they are selfish. If you only spend your money on yourself, then that tells other people something. But if you can give some of it away to help other people, then that says something. You see, money talks in our culture. It always has. But guess what it says? It says, this is what's most important to me. This is where my heart is. There are many reasons why the Christian life is hard. But the main reason that I think it's hard is because Jesus calls us to deny self. Because we live in a culture that is all about self. Think about marketing. Everybody tells us that we deserve this right now. that we deserve it right now. And the concept of delayed gratification is a foreign concept in our culture. Because when we want something, we want it right now, and usually we get it. Every single one of us has to work to not be selfish and to exercise restraint in a culture of instant gratification. Just because we can get something doesn't always mean that we should, and I think the financial people in here would agree with me this morning. Lastly, the fourth point that Barclay makes is perhaps his best. He says, although the love of money is based on a desire for security, it usually only leads to more fear and anxiety. The more a person has, the more they fear losing what they have. There's a fable told about a peasant who rendered a great service to a king, and he was given a large sum of money as a reward. And for a short while, the peasant was thrilled, but after a while, he went back to the king and he begged him to take the gift back from him because he said his life had become dominated by worry of losing what he had. Now, some of you may be thinking, now, Clay, that's crazy. Give me that problem and I'll sort it out. But here's the deal. When the love of money takes over our lives, we can't think about anything else. All we seem to do is long for more, and all we seem to do is compare ourselves to what other people have. Is it any wonder that as our culture has grown more and more materialistic, it has also grown more and more anxious and fearful? Because these two things go together. And anxiety and fear work against faith. That downtown dinner that I mentioned that we went to, we were sitting next to a guy named Dr. David Vanderpool. And David is the CEO and medical director of an organization called Live Beyond. You can go to livebeyond.org and see what he's doing. But he's originally from Dallas. He grew up the son of a doctor, very privileged and blessed. It was never a question of whether David was going to become a doctor. It was just a question of what type of doctor he was going to become. Well, he and his wife have always had a heart for medical missions, which is something that I would love to see us do more of as a church, by the way. But about once a month, he would travel to a country and he would do medical missions. Well, he and his wife, Lori, made a deal. They said after their last child goes off to college, they were going to sell everything that they owned and move to a third world country, open up a clinic, and serve the poor. And that's what they did. A year ago, when their last child went off to college, they sold their house in Brentwood. He closed down his practice at Centennial. And they sold everything that they had just about, and they moved to Haiti to set up a clinic just outside of Port-au-Prince. And I sat there at that dinner and listened to this guy telling his story and talking about how God continues to provide for his clinic. And I was simply amazed that an American trauma surgeon would have the courage to do this, to uproot, to leave his stable practice, to sell his possessions, and to move to Haiti to serve the poor. You see, for David Vanderpool, it's not about money. It's about calling and giving back, serving the least of these. And even though he gets sick often, he catches viruses, he gets ringworm, he doesn't have the best living conditions down there, he couldn't be happier doing what he's doing, and he trusts that God will provide for that clinic. And he was sitting there at that dinner with a shirt on and no tie, and he told me, he said, yeah, last year when we sold everything, I sold all of my ties. And I didn't think I needed to buy one just for this dinner. And he didn't. You talk about courage. Talk about freedom. Talk about service. He's living it. Perhaps it's only when we get exposed to people in the world who have little or nothing that we can fully appreciate what we have, and then we can use it to give back and to save lives. Let me close with another Fred Craddock story that I love. Fred is a master of humor that makes profound statements. But Fred tells a story about going to visit his daughter, I think in California. And his daughter and son-in-law and his grandchildren, they had adopted a couple of greyhounds who used to race. And so Fred talks about having a conversation with one of these greyhounds. It was old and laying on the floor. And Fred says, well, do you race anymore? And the greyhound says, no, I don't race anymore. What's wrong? You get hurt? No, I'm not hurt. What's wrong? You couldn't win any races? No, I won lots of money for my owners in my day. Well, what's wrong? Why don't you race anymore? Finally, the greyhound looked at him and he said, I just quit. Fred said, you quit? He said, yeah, I just quit. After a while, it finally occurred to me that after all those years of running round and round the track, we were chasing a fake rabbit. And so I quit. All that running and running and running and running, and we were chasing a fake rabbit. Amen.